I think I've got us at 1 o'clock. Oh, we're after 1 o'clock. So let's get started. And the way to do this, I think, will be remembering that we are, Catamount Access Television is in fact taping this, and will, for reasons that, for public use, they will be broadcasting or making it available to the public. Let's put it that way. I know that a number of us have done this before, and yet a number of us haven't. So if you wouldn't mind, I will just go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Bruce Lee Clark. I'm convening these meetings on behalf of the Select Board. Somebody asked me how many have we done, and this is number 11. Dan have been with me the whole way on that, and Linda Bermudez has been here on many of those occasions. The outcome of this, our minutes, if you will be our draft that we end up with. Just for those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to give one quick item. Besides being a teacher here, I practiced law in New York, was a United Methodist minister. Now I'm retired from that. And one of my great interests is railroads. And that's partly because my grandfather was an engineer for the Boston and Maine on the North Shore Line. In fact, died in 1945 after finishing his last trip between Salem and Boston. There was a note we found that said that he had written from before that said if he had a choice, he would like to die on the railroad, and he did. He got what his wish was. Gotta love the guy. I've just enjoyed railroads for my whole life. So, who would like to go next and just say a little bit about yourself? John, John, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'm John Dyke. I'm relatively new to the area. We moved here in 2017. Before that, I was an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington, for decades. Slowly learning about the area and enjoying it.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
So you worked in the Department of Agriculture building that we all know so well?
No, there were too many economists, so they rented space for us in another building.
Oh.
Also, they didn't want us that close.
Perfectly understandable, I guess.
Yeah.
Kara. Or Kara.
It's Kara.
That's right.
Kara. Hi, I'm Kara Lusa. I've lived in Bennington since 1995. I live in Bennington, and I work at United Counseling Service, and I participated in the traffic policy review.
Yes. Lon, you're next on my screen.
Okay, I'm Lon McClintock. I've been in this area since 1982 and officially moved up from White Creek over to Shaftesbury in '88. And I started out doing poverty law work, and since 1988 I have been in private practice, 24 years with Tom Jacobs and Justine Scanlon, and then since 2012 I've been on my own. And had 2 kids go through the public schools, and have a wife who spent a good part of her career at the VA outpatient clinic on North Street.
Great. Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Canning, and I moved here with my husband in September of 1973. And we had our family here, and my husband worked at the hospital as a clinical chemist for a long time, and I had a couple of different careers. I started out in human services, and then I eventually went into education and worked as a teacher in the Bennington school system for 17 years. And I've retired in 1917, excuse me, 2017. And I know, no, I'm not that old. But I had two children also who went through the school system, and they're both, I have one daughter who's teaching first grade at Bennell now, the school that she went to when she was young. And my other daughter's PA. She works in healthcare over in the Albany Medical Center. So it's nice having my family around. But I've got a long time interest in what's been going on in Bennington, and have shared all kinds of responsibilities on school boards and things over the years, and have had some practice myself in writing policy and dealing with employee relations. So this is a very important area, and I'm happy to participate.
Hey, thanks, Kate. Which Dan would like to go next? There you go.
Hello. Good afternoon, Daniel Ferrara, Corporal of the Bennington Police Department. As it states on the bottom of my screen, because I cannot figure out how to change that, I am not Armorowski or Jay Stem. But I am a corporal with the Bennington Police Department, close to 5 years now. I've been partaking in these meetings since they started, so looking forward to working with you guys for yet another meeting.
Great. And Mr. Monks.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name's Dan Monks. Let's see. I've worked for the town since 1998. Before that, I practiced commercial real estate law in Washington, D.C. for a few years. Let's see. I grew up in North Bennington, Vermont. Spent a little time down south going to school, and moved back in 1998, started working for the town. So good to see everybody, and looking forward to another successful meeting.
Yeah. Let me just say, I know that a number of us have done this before, but for John's sake and just for everybody to remind us, the chat system is off for this meeting because this is an open meeting and we follow open meeting law. At least it's supposed to be off, so just don't use it. That's the best thing. The other thing is we'll go around and talk about what are our issues with regard to this policy, and ask questions. I know a number of you have had a chance to ask questions. Dan Ferrara, thank you for doing that, Dan. We learned something new this time. That's probably a really good practice to try to help you out, since you're going to get a lot of questions anyway on a number of these. Once we've gone through that, sort of each of us on our own, to the whole committee, we'll start working on at least we have the option of starting to work using the policy that actually is the current policy of the Bennington PD that was drafted just shortly after the International Association of Chiefs of Police report. So it's relatively new, but it seems to me there are always opportunities for improvement. And since these are policies that the select board will be adopting, it's a policy directive basically to the police department. The police department will be drafting the procedures. There are some, as I will note in my own conversation, there are some statements in the procedures that I think are much more policy oriented, and I'm going to suggest we take a look at that possibility of moving them up into that section. So our task is really to work on purpose, policy, and definitions. What will then happen, once we're done, and we can be done before 4, it's actually happened once. We were done on a very nice day. We were done before 4 o'clock. So it may be raining by that time, but at any rate, it seems to me we don't have to stay until 4. But when we're done, our draft will go through Linda and over to Dan, and then Dan will look at it, make whatever editorial changes seem right that we didn't catch when we were doing it, and that's okay. We don't need to spend our time on the editorial stuff. He'll send it to me, I will go through the same thing, and then we'll send it back out to all of you, so that you will then have opportunity to look at it, see if it comports with our discussions. You know, insight may have happened over the weekend, and that's always possible. So all next week, pretty much, you will have an opportunity to take a look at it, make some suggestions, and then send it back to me. Once that happens and I sort of put it together, if there are no big substantive changes, I will send it on to the state's attorney and to our own town attorney office. And they will then have a look at it and review it, bring it back with any suggestions, and if there aren't substantial ones, then we will take it up at a select board meeting for a first reading and then a second reading, and hopefully for adoption at that point. At which point then it goes over to the police department for working on procedures. And they've got a subcommittee of officers who are working on that. Any questions about the process? Good. Today, I think the one thing I will say is it's been my practice, and I'm going to continue to keep to it. It's about 2:30, no matter where we are in the process, we're going to take a 5 or 10 minute, somewhere between 5 minute and 10 minute break to get up and walk around, you know, do whatever we need to do, and then come back and finish. And we will be finished by 4. If not before, you never know. So, I know a number of people asked questions of Dan, and Dan, I don't know if you had a chance to work through those, but it seems to me one of the best places to start is with answering questions. And I know, John, you also had a question about town policy. Dan Monks may be able to answer that question. I know I can't.
Alright, so I did receive questions from 2 people.
Yeah.
One being Mr. Lon. He posed 10 questions to me. And then I got another person that sent me a question asking if any departments in the rest of the town have this policy in place as well, or a form of it. I figured Mr. Monks might be better suited to answer that, since I am only knowledgeable in the policies and procedures for the police department. But for the other 10 questions from Lon, I can go over those.
Sure.
So he asked how many officers of all ranks are employed by the Bennington Police Department. We have 25, as well as 2 office employees, and time dispatchers we have 6, and then we also have a handful of part-time dispatchers. How many shifts does the police department operate? We operate with 3 shifts. We have a day shift, evening shift, and midnight shift. How many officers have supervisory authority over day-to-day police conduct? So our staffing compiles of 4 corporals, 3 sergeants, a lieutenant, a chief, and also a detective sergeant. All of those have some sort of supervisory authority. How many and which supervising officers have authority to hire and or fire officers? That would mainly just be the chief along with the town manager. How many and which supervising officers have authority to take adverse action for officer error and or misconduct? That would be roughly about the same answers as number 3 and number 4 combined, being the administrative positions and supervisory positions that I listed. And then the chief and town manager have their roles in the taking action over the any misconduct or errors. How many and which supervising officers have authority to recommend promotion and or demotion of an officer? It is ultimately the chief that, again, along with the town manager, that does any promotions and or demotions for anybody. How many and which supervising officers have authority to assign officers to shifts, departments, and or duties within the police department? The lieutenant is in charge of the entire patrol division, so that would be the main one, but the chief can also assign people to various positions as well. Where were we? How many supervisors work on each shift? So in the patrol division, there's a total of 7 between the corporals and sergeants, and then there's the lieutenant and chief as well. And number 9, in the event that 2 related officers were called out due to a family emergency, could the police department cover that shift? And he specified that he's essentially wants to know if the police department has enough personnel to cover for or adapt has enough personnel to cover for or adapt have related officers working within the departments. So long answer short, yes. If we do encounter any type of event that leaves our department short of officers or anything like that, we do adjust schedules. A lot of times it will create overtime, but we do still make that work. And if a supervisor is related to a non-supervisor, could another supervisor step in and perform job evaluations, review investigative errors, omissions, and or misconduct, make duty assignments, and take adverse action or terminate the non-supervisory officer with the level of competence, fairness, and thoroughness expected of a direct supervisor? Again, long answer short is yes. Adjustments, we can make adjustments to make sure that any type of supervisory oversight over another will not have any sort of conflict.
Can I ask for a clarification, because I think Dan missed one point?
Okay.
Dan, you answered the question that the chief and the town manager do the promotions or demotions, adverse action. But when you have people within the department competing, say, for a promotion, who else provides information on who's, say, the best candidate for that promotion or the relative merits of...
For a promotional process, there's an entire, that's what it is, it's a process. It compiles of 3 to 4 steps along the way. But like I said, the ultimate decision comes down to the chief and town manager. But during that process, they may reach out to people that currently supervise those that are going to those positions and might get their input, since they do work alongside of them day to day. But like I said, the steps during the process are in place, and the ultimate decision would come down to the chief and town manager.
Right, but the supervising officer has some role in the promotion process.
I don't know if it's a role per se, and it's up to the chief, and if they even want to act or get their input. They don't have to. I'm just assuming that is part of what they do, just to kind of get a feel for how the person might work during everyday work.
And does anybody besides the chief do written evaluations?
Yeah, so the supervisors on each shift do the evaluations for the officers that work under them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Did you get, Dan, I wasn't keeping track, did you get through all of Lon's questions at that point?
Yes, he did. And then I mentioned that the other question better fit for Dan Monks to answer since it involves a question regarding the entire town. I don't know if he was able to see that. I think you were included in the email, Bruce.
Yes. So Dan, are there other departments or does the town have a policy regarding nepotism and fraternization?
So luckily, Dan gave me some time. I just texted and got a response from Michelle Johnson, our Human Resources Director, since I didn't know the exact answer. I know we have, let's say, ways we do things, but whether or not it's written down in our employee policy or not, I wanted to make sure. So with regard to fraternization, romantic relationships, etc., in the town of Bennington, we do not currently have a formal written policy. Just found out from Michelle that they are currently looking at doing a comprehensive, or actually started doing a comprehensive review of the employee manual, and that is one of the noted deficiencies that we are going to address. And we plan to start with the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns model as our model, and as we work through it. I know with regard to hiring, however, that we have a very clear policy about not hiring anybody who's related, who works in the same department. In other words, if there's a sister or a brother or a spouse that wants to work in the town office, unless there's some very compelling reason, like they have a unique skill that's not available, I don't know how that would ever happen, but not available anywhere else, then maybe we would consider it with very strict separation. But we have a pretty strict policy that if you're related, you won't be working in the same department under the same supervisor, etc.
Is that a formal written policy?
I don't know that. I just know that whenever we're hiring people, we say, "Oh, related. Sorry, can't consider." But I have never confirmed that it's written in the employee manual. But I can find that out.
I thought of a question for the officer.
Thank you, Kara. Yep.
Bonds. How often do you need to refer to this policy at the police department?
I'm not sure what that question. How often the relationships between people that work there? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be a separate question.
Yeah, I
So
don't know.
that's my follow-up question. How often do staff or the chief actually need to refer to this particular policy? And then the follow-up to that would be exactly what you just asked. How often does fraternization or nepotism happen, or is it a consideration?
So I can comment on anything that I've been involved in, and that's been never since I've been working here. And as far as if people are being looked into as far as having a relationship with other people in the department, that's not something that I would be privy to in general, since that would be an investigation that administration would do, and they would take any action that they need to as far as if they need to keep people separated and things like that. So to give you an exact answer that you'd probably be looking for, I wouldn't be able to, just because I don't have the ability to have that knowledge, if that makes sense. And then, like I said, as far as the knowing how often this has to get this policy has to be reviewed, that would fall under the same circumstances as I know my personal involvement would be never. But I don't know how often it's a concern for administration that they'd have to review this and make sure that things are abided by other people.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I can say this, that this policy was essentially drafted and put into effect about 14 months ago. Prior to that, there wasn't a formal policy, there was a practice, but it's, as I understand it anyway. And it was created based on, as I understand it, looking at the League of Cities and Towns model. But it was basically drafted by the chief in response to the IACP report, identifying this as one of the ones that they should be looking at. So if they've had to look at it, my guess is it wouldn't have been that many times just because it hadn't been there. And that's not unusual for departments in Vermont. Let's see. Other questions for Dan? Well, let me suggest a couple of things aside from the fact that it's saying that my internet is unstable. Who would like to start with just talking about you've seen the current Bennington PD policy, issues, concerns, things that you'd like to make sure that we cover so that we know that we've done our due diligence here. Does somebody have a desire to start that conversation?
Sure.
Thanks, Kara.
You're welcome. So I got the two articles that were recently sent out. I think it was by you, Bruce, actually.
Yes, it was by me.
Okay. And I thought maybe I would go through in the policy sample article,
Yeah.
go through the contents of the fraternization policies. It's got some bulleted highlights in there. I thought that maybe we could go through and compare the recommendations to what currently exists. I noticed that in reviewing the policy, it looks like it's, a good effort has been made to address a lot of what was in these articles, and I think it just needs some fine tuning, if you will.
Yep. And I should say I sent those out partly just to give folks, they are very representative of the kind of information that's out there for just general organizations or companies trying to come up with some kind of policy. It doesn't mean necessarily that I agree with everything that's in there, though there are some, I think, helpful thoughts and comments, and particularly about people in managerial positions or in what I would call here supervisory positions in this context. So I think that's helpful. Let me also say that I have a couple of things that I would like to address. I think there are some parts of the current policy statement that I find almost impossible to decipher the meaning of, and that would include, well, if you look at the draft that we have at the moment, and actually, Linda, if you want to go down to that first page under policy, yeah, right in that paragraph. It's line 21 to the word process in line 25. That sentence, I think it's actually a sentence that I get the general gist of, but I think it's actually trying to do too much work. And I think we could clarify that most easily. Again, part of this is that the whole policy statement is one big paragraph, and I actually think we could do better by separating things out. Yeah, all the way over to page 2, line 14 is all one big paragraph. And particularly when we're talking about fraternization as one thing and nepotism as another, it might be helpful to separate out the issues, the policy issues around nepotism and the policy issues around fraternization. That's an organizational and clarity matter, which I think is clarity will always be helpful.
Bruce,
Yes,
you earlier asked for some comments and Kara shared hers.
yes.
But I was sort of hoping to follow up
I,
with hers.
as soon as that's what I'm actually doing. I just took the next spot. I'm sorry, I didn't need to do that.
Well, I thought you were moving us to sort of more of a
I'm not
line by
moving
line.
us. No, I'm not. I'm still in the general conversationals.
Okay, I'm sorry then, I misunderstood.
Nope, that's okay. So I do think that's one place where I think we can get a much clearer set of policy statements around both of those issues. And I would actually be looking, and I think there is some help out there through both from the IACP and from the document that Kara actually identified as to defining nepotism and defining fraternization to some degree. And the last thing that I want to make sure that we put in somewhere under policy is particularly the policy with regard to fraternization is the duty to notify the supervisors and make sure that that's clearly in there. Okay, so those are my big issues for this policy. So Lon, I'll give it to you next.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna
Do whatever you want.
live up to my reputation and be blunt. I don't like this policy.
Okay.
Because I think it's vague and the captions don't provide any guidance. Just the poster child for that was the section that talked about hiring, promotion, and assignment to specialized position. Really talks about romantic relationships, which is a specific type of issue, but I think we'd be better served by not using this as a model for doing a line by line, because it doesn't address the big competing values that the policy has to address. So the first one that I think the chief and the town manager and the select board should ask is the policy going to allow for nepotism or not? That is not just are they going to allow related people to serve in the department or not. That's part of the reason for the questions to Dan, Corporal Dan, not town manager Dan, before, was to get a sense, because one of the key values is equal employment opportunity. And when there are related individuals working in a workplace, a person can feel they're not being hired for gender reasons, sexual orientation, or marital status, or they're not being promoted for any number of those reasons. And so part of the general problem with this policy, it talks about people getting along and working well as an effective department, and that's a separate value. And it's a critical value. But equally important is fairness in hiring, workplace supervision, promotion, adverse action, termination from a civil rights standpoint. And so I think the purpose of the policy has to reflect those competing values. So I think that needs to be addressed. And the other so the leadership has to decide, are we going to allow related individuals to work in the department? The second one is to more clearly articulate what the competing values are, because you want to make sure that you're looking at those equal opportunity issues as part of how do we create a framework for a healthy and legal work environment. And then the third thing is that this really doesn't address the problem, because ultimately, as has been described, all of the issues float up to the chief and the town manager. And then the roles of other supervisors who provide information in the either recommendations or promotion or adverse action or whatever, it's not clearly defined what happens when there's a relationship issue that calls into question the integrity of that process. I looked at the Loyola University nepotism policy, and it provided more clarity in terms of what those procedures are and what the circumstances are that you are required to put something in place to address that issue. So, for example, one of the requirements is that they have a written plan when they've got a nepotism. Address what happens if the town manager's close relative is working in the department, or the chief has a close relative working in the department. If everything flows up to those two, but there's no guidance for what happens in that situation, what do we do? And so I'm just not comfortable with this framework as the policy for the town, because I think it leaves the chief exactly where he is right now, and the town manager, which is a lot of aspirations but very vague and no guidance.
Thank you, Lon. It's okay. We've actually crossed off everything under purpose before. Will not be the first time. And we could actually at least take a stab at, but I think I was I'll admit I was very uncomfortable with much of the vague aspirational language. But let's move around and see what other people think. John or Kate, who would like to go next if you have anything? If you'd like to go.
Well, I don't really have much to offer. I really concur with everything Lon just said. I think that the idea of having more specific guidance from the top right down through all of the employees connected with the department is really important. And I know that all of the organizations that I've worked with historically didn't have policies like this. I don't think that people in the past recognized the need for them the way we do now. And I also think that these kinds of policies, even when I was working with the school board and as an employee in the school system, these kinds of things I think are really important. And I think it would be very good to have that kind of guidance. If it's lacking, it really should be there. So I applaud. I learned so much in going through this process, and I think that it's just really important to have that kind of clarity. My comment about reading the information that came from the benefit of having a workplace policy and the sample policy from the cities and towns was that the contrast between the proposed policy and those is that they at least provided some additional specifics, some guidelines around some of the language in the proposed policy. And that's what I think that, from my point of view, would be good to include. And also, when you're talking about procedural versus training, for instance, that will have to be implemented another time. Sometimes you can distinguish between the language that's in the policy versus the continued work that's going to be done during training periods. So I understand there'll be more work done for employees over time. But I just think that this is, as I hear your comments and as I listen and read, it's becoming clear to me that this is something that really needs a lot of fine tuning. It's really important.
Thanks, Kate. John?
I agree with some of the comments about the chief of police and town manager that Lon was making. And to me, it seems like this set of policies is in no way unique to the Bennington Police Department. It should be applied to any department in the town. And one concern I have is that if Dan Monk said there's a policy manual or personnel manual coming up for the whole town, would that within a year or two supersede this one and, make our work moot here? But specifically, when I went through the current town policy, I saw no way to to discipline the chief of police. He doesn't fit into this policy statement. And I guess recently in Williamstown, it was the chief of police who got in trouble for sexual harassment. Our current one may be completely beyond reproach, but you have to have structures in place to prevent the chief of police from getting in any trouble. So somehow we need to add that, or maybe this whole thing should be incorporated in a town-wide document that would automatically get the chiefs of the departments, like the chief of police or public works, included. Aside from that, there are some cases where the wording seems to put a lot of responsibility and authority on one side, authority on the other, in the hands of subordinates. It seems to me that there should be joint management and employee reporting and negotiation recognized or required in some of these procedures.
Thanks, John. Good thoughts, everybody. Excuse me, Dan. Question. Relationship between, or at least historical relationship, and some of this is changing. This is for Dan Monks. Historical relationship between what have been in the police department general orders and policies of the town, personnel policies. I know it's somewhat complicated, but what has been the relationship there that would help us in this process?
Sure. So the employee manual applies to all employees, whether they're police department, DPW, town office, etc. Obviously the police general orders apply only to the police. So the answer is, if you're a police officer, you need to comply with both, and the most stringent would apply. So if there's a conflicting information in the policy, the employee manual versus the general order, the most strict is going to apply to your conduct or your behavior.
So let me just give you a hypothetical that is, let's say that one of the applicants for an open position in the police department is a relative of the current chief.
They wouldn't be considered.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought the current situation is. So to some degree,
it's a no-go.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, sure.
Could you find relative though? What if it's a distant relative 4 times removed on your mother's side, or a relative via marriage? Is that still the same?
Oh, obviously, the further you get out, if you're a 4th cousin twice removed, it's hard. But I can tell you for sure, if you're a brother, sister, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, wife of any one of those, spouse of any one of those, then you're not going to be considered.
So what I'm hearing is immediate family.
Yes.
Immediate, okay,
Immediate family is an automatic disqualifier.
okay,
Doesn't that you mean, some cousins are like, might as well be your brother, if it's
right.
a family. So that has to come into consideration. You can't, there's no way that we're going to, endanger the integrity of a department because of a perceived conflict of familial relationships.
So,
Does the town manager get involved with every hire?
Yes. The town manager is responsible by charter for the hiring and firing of all personnel.
So, but is he actually involved in the hiring of every officer?
Yes.
Okay.
No officer is hired until the chief of police discusses that hire and the town manager officially approves it.
Is it up to the chief to disclose any relationships?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't imagine that the town manager would suffer a chief of police who didn't disclose that he had a close familiar relationship with a.
Well, but also like this is the lieutenant's nephew that he's raised since he was 10 years old. I mean, I'm not just talking about the chief having a relationship, but the chief's going to be responsible for the lieutenant or a corporal having a relationship with a potential hire.
Anything the chief has knowledge of, he needs to disclose. Absolutely.
And that's current practice, not necessarily written down.
That's correct. Yep.
That's current practice, and remember that the document you got is the current practice. It's the current general order.
It is.
So for instance, the definitions of family relationship are in that document, and so. As unclear as it is often the case, right there, and in some cases elsewhere, for instance, it seems fairly broad to me, though it is also, it seems to me, and I will admit to everybody, I also think it's too vague.
Well,
To be in this, particularly in this area of hiring, firing, disciplining, there's a lot that we have to be concerned about.
if we go back to Dan Mo's point for just a minute.
Sure.
Dan, it sounds like, let's say, since we're not certain it's a town policy, the town practice is not to hire folks that are going to be directly supervised by a closely related person. This policy doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say that's the policy of the police department. So instead of looking at the police department, Dan, would it make any sense if we didn't talk about a nepotism policy for the police department, but talked about a nepotism policy for the town, rather than potentially having two nepotism policies with the town administration maybe, have one in mind and the police having another, and maybe just some confusion over time because there are differences in language or whatever?
It might make sense, but that's not why we're here today. So I would say we have to focus on the police department, and you can certainly make the recommendation that, and I can't imagine that they wouldn't be, but that any new policy adopted by the select board with regard to employees in general would be consistent.
I guess I would make the recommendation that the police department adopt the nepotism policy already in place by the town, and that the police department follows the town nepotism policy. And to the extent it doesn't have one, I mean, we certainly could make a recommendation as to what it should be, but I think with what Dan's describing, it doesn't make any sense to create a new nepotism policy if one already exists for the town and every officer is required to follow it.
What do people think about that?
It worries me a little bit that the policy currently followed by the town managers isn't written down or mandated by the select board.
Again, I can't say for certain if it is written down or not. I just know it's strictly adhered to. I don't know.
We can, here's what we can do, and I'm still wanting to hear everybody who's on this committee about what your interests are. But we can, for the moment, since there really are two separate things in my way of categorizing this. Nepotism is one thing, and employee fraternization policy is sort of a different animal. And I was going to try to see if we could do it in two sort of separate parts anyway. But we could work on the fraternization part and leave the nepotism section to the town, or I mean, you could legitimately, if you wanted to, make the exact same argument regarding fraternization, because the town should have a fraternization policy, and I'm not sure that it does in the personnel policy. I'm quite sure that it doesn't.
We don't.
Yep. I know that the police department needs one. Actually, the police department has one. Unfortunately, it's this one. In my view, unfortunately. I mean, it's better than nothing, although I'm not sure how much better than nothing.
They're the same issue, Bruce. It's all dealing with conflicts of interest, where somebody's acting out of a personal interest,
Right?
as opposed to their interest as an employee and their duty of loyalty to their employer.
Right.
And so I'm really uncomfortable trying to adopt a policy for the police department when we've got a set of town practices and potentially policies that they're already following and that everybody's expected to adhere to regardless. I mean, it's sort of like, okay, we draft this policy, but the town's separately got its own policy and procedures, and that's what's happening.
Except, Lon, I would disagree with you that I don't think that we do have a town fraternization policy. We don't.
But
we don't even have a practice.
Well, we don't know what the nepotism policy is.
I'm saying if we bifurcate this and just say,
but they're not different issues. They're the same issues, roughly dealing with personal conflicts of interest that interfere with people's ability to do their job in a fair and objective manner.
So if I could just make sure I understand the point you're trying to make, because I'm not sure I do. You are saying that this committee should just basically walk away and say, we can't do this today because nepotism and fraternization are essentially the same thing. Yes, they do both deal with conflict of interest. I get that. And that we can't do this because the town, we're not sure where the town is, and of course police officers are also town employees.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I'm beginning to hear a concern on the part of the fact that if you're going to have a town policy that's going to supersede department policies, then would the case be that the police policy would become subordinate to the town policy, and therefore you could work on this, but it's really the town's policy that would be followed. So until there's one in place with the town, then the one for the police department wouldn't be that effective? I mean, I'm just curious about what the sort of chain of command issues are here.
Okay, thank
Could
you.
could I clarify it?
You can clarify it, and I'm gonna go to Dan Monks. Yep.
Okay. I think we can work on it when we know what the town's written policy is. And I think we should work on it because the police department, well, to the extent the town has one, the police department has had one since long before they adopted this one based on that report. Because, as Dan Monks pointed out, every officer is a town employee expected to follow the town personnel rules. And to the extent that there are issues unique to the police department, you know, we certainly could weigh in that way, or to the extent the town is opening to hear our ideas about these two issues, which I think are the same thing, because the only difference between fraternization and nepotism is that there's typically no familial bond with one, but you've got the same personal interests creating the concerns, you know.
Okay.
So, you know, I just think if we know what the town's policy is, that gives us something to work with and something useful to do.
Yep. But not today, apparently. Dan Monks.
Sure. So, just to maybe, I confirmed with Michelle Johnson. I was texting while you guys were chatting that we do not have a written policy regarding nepotism or fraternization. I do know from personal experience, even though I don't do any hiring, that we have very strict rules regarding familial relationships and that and romantic relationships with regard to supervision and hiring. So it would be, as much as I'd love to go and do other things today, I think that it would make the most sense for us to try to put together a policy for the police department and recommend that the town consider this policy when adopting their revised employee manual, and simply incorporate this and change it to impact all employees. That would be my recommendation, but I'm happy with whatever anybody wants to do today.
Okay, thank you. Kara.
How is the town following those strict rules if they don't exist in a policy?
Because we've had a town manager now who's served for several decades, and he has a high level of integrity, and every time we go through the hiring process, it's the same thing. We look at the same thing with regard to familial relationships and romantic relationships.
But it's not documented. That's what I'm hearing, is it's not documented anywhere.
It's not in a formal policy, that's correct. I think that's probably like 90% of towns in the state of Vermont.
Kara, unfortunately, I will concur with Dan Monks that in general, as I've discovered, being even just in this position, that's generally true. When I go out to ask other towns for their policies about certain things, the answer is we don't have that. We just work on what this is our practice. And so what you might, this isn't how I would do it.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to dispute the fact that their application didn't get reviewed, are we just supposed to go on the integrity of the town manager as a rebuttal as to why the applicant wasn't reviewed or interviewed?
Town manager has the authority under the charter to hire and fire. That it's the absolute authority within the town manager to do that. If the select board doesn't believe he's doing the right thing, they can fire him on 90 days notice. He's gone.
Based on rules that aren't documented anywhere.
Actually, the select board can fire him for any reason whatsoever. They don't
For
have
no reason at all.
So
For no
I
reason at all.
understand at-will employment, but what I'm saying is there's no guidelines documented anywhere for these rules that you speak of that are being strictly followed.
Exactly. Correct. Kara, you've got it absolutely correctly.
So
Yep.
when I think about the relationship between the Bennington Police Department and the town of Bennington, I'm thinking about the structure of UCS, for example. UCS has a set of policies that are applicable to every single department, regardless of what department you work in. From there, each department has a set of protocols that are specific to that area. So, for example, I'm the supervisor of medical records. I have to follow all of UCS's policies, but I have health information protocols that are specific to me. So, thinking back to the traffic policy, that would be specific to the Bennington Police Department and very appropriate to review. I think that the nepotism and this fraternization policy needs to be at the town level and applicable to all departments,
I
and
see.
not have and not offer the opportunity for two conflicting policies.
Or the same hiring and firing practices regardless of what the department is that a person works in. Is there a fraternity or a nepotism policy at UCS, Kara?
I'm
You know?
sure there is. I'd have to go back and look.
Well, see, that's one of my frustrations here, because with all these discussions about which entity has which policy and who takes precedence, the town of Bennington would take precedence for all its departments, the police department being one. So, it does feel like until there's something at the town level, it's hard to assume that the development of a policy at the police department level would then be acceptable to everybody. And I guess my question for Bruce here is, how do you think, you're a member of the Board of Selectmen, how would the select people respond, do you think, to this kind of recommendation?
Well, let me think about that for a minute. I know Dan has had his hand up for some time. I also have something that I want to make sure gets said, and then I'll try to answer your question. Dan?
So it's interesting, Kara's comment about it should be single policy addressed to everybody, and I agree with that. However, when the IACP came in, they had a very strong recommendation that the police develop their own policies, even if it covers the same subject matter, which is, I don't think, appropriate. But for instance, we have a town-wide, very strict sexual harassment policy. And IACP said, that's not good enough. You need to also have one for the police department, even though we pointed out to them, well, every single police department employee is an employee of the town. So I kind of agree with Kara, but we're following the recommendations of the IACP in these endeavors. So
Yes, UCS has a policy in place.
Oh, good.
Good. Okay. So let me say a couple of things, and this is partly, and Kate, I will answer your question, and if I don't answer it well enough, keep my feet to the fire. One of the reasons why this is happening, and this is the way this is because of the historical isolation of the police department, not just here in Bennington, but across the country. This kind of siloed nature. Police departments have worked on policy, what they call general orders. It's pretty much the same as policy. It's not the same as it does include protocols, but it's more than that. So Kara, they do have, for instance, protocols. They have a huge book that includes protocols, general orders, and other documents. It's not always clear for me having looked at them, that there's a clear enough distinction. But so part of what we're doing over this course of, a year, this year has been to work on the list of policies that the IACP had strongly urged us, and this was one of them. There wasn't anything in the department when the IACP came here, so as I understand it. So this was what you've seen was written and put into place as a general order, and is currently the document under which the police department is operating. Now, do I think, Kate, I am probably the worst person to ask about what the select board will think of a suggestion that the town, that we develop policies regarding the town first, and only then see. And I'm going to agree with Kara and Dan. This seems to me to be a different kind of policy than the traffic one. I will agree. Certainly, it's different than the use of conductive electrical weapons, since the police department is the only organization that has those. So this is a more generalized one. It's the same issue that we had to some degree under when we were working on social media, and to some degree there may be others as well, but those are the ones that pop into my mind. I think that the select board may I'm very pro making policy, and I actually think that the select board needs to be making more policy in this area, and adopting them not just for themselves but for the town. I think that's really one of the major functions of a select board. What I'm concerned about, and why I'm hesitating about just going to the board and saying, we can't do this in this setting at this time, we may want to go ahead. The only reason I'm hesitant about that is because I actually think that the current general order is so vague as to be not. I want to be careful with my language here. I don't think it's going to be as helpful if when the rubber hits the road in some situation. I think it's going to be an inadequate document, and so I'm reluctant. I mean, I would at the very least like to have us thinking about, or in fact discussing, what are the, I mean, this is where I think what Lon brought to the table is exceptionally important. The purpose statement behind both nepotism and fraternization should include, and this one doesn't, it does to some degree, but doesn't do it as clearly as possible, should include the values that we think are going to be expressed in the policy. So what are those values? And Lon went through his list so quickly that I didn't write it down. But
Could I jump in?
yeah.
All right. So since I started us down this rabbit hole, and Dan Muntz has now pointed up that the town does not have a specific policy about nepotism, I think we take Dan's suggestion, we go ahead and create a policy and recommend that the town adopt it so that there's a consistent policy between the police department and the town. That moves the ball forward and we get some work done today. The second thing is,
Yep.
I think the town is not unlike a lot of organizations, even in private business, where they will have practices that may or may not reflect policy, if the policy even exists. But, you know, that being just the nature of human institutions, I would suggest that we incorporate the long practice of not hiring related individuals into this policy. It's not stated in this policy, but it should be, because the people who make the decision are following that practice anyway. And it goes back to my first point. Should we say no related people can be hired in the same department or not? it seems like that decision was made some time ago by administration, which is fine. That's their managerial prerogative. So let's build that into this. And then, in addition to your language about values, I think it's important to use the word conflict of interest in the purpose section, because what we're trying to do now, and the other value we talked about was equal employment opportunity. You know, so decisions aren't made based on gender, marital or familial relationships.
Correct.
The other, and incorporate those into the purpose, and then later on when you're talking about the policy, recognize that familial relationships and romantic relationships create conflicts of interest. I think the term conflict of interest is pretty well understood, where nepotism doesn't come up in everyday conversation. And fraternization, I tend to think of the military. I don't know why, I just do.
And that's why, and Lon, that's why it's used in this context, because the police departments across the country have developed that structure of thinking.
Yeah. Okay, and the last thing is, it's a technical issue. Civil unions has been left out. I checked the statute. It's still on the books. There are people who got civil unions years ago who did not go on and get married. So that language should be built in, because they're not married, but a civil union is, from this policy perspective, as good as a marriage in creating a conflict of interest.
Yes, exactly.
So I would build
That was
in
on
there.
my list, but I wasn't going to get that specific. Good.
And then the other specific language thing I would build in here is that there should be some requirement for a management plan in the event of one of these conflicts of interest. So I could see where the town manager says, I'm not going to weigh in on this because I have too close a relationship to be objective. I'm going to let Dan Muntz handle this.
Right.
I think those things are fine, but I'd like the policy to reflect that that's written down, that that's what the decision was, so that that the town, I think, to protect itself, has shown that it's considered these conflicts of interest and come up with a management plan for a particular situation. I think that'll help.
How do we all feel about that suggestion?
I think it's a good one. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
John?
That's, I think, Dan and Monk said before that what we do here probably would get considered later on. It's worth going on.
I have found that to be highly likely. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
A lot of the discussion that we had regarding social media, I think is going to be incorporated into a townwide social media policy. I think what we're going to see over the course of the next number of, for however long it's going to take, is much more intentional adoption and of policy at the town level that will include all employees. So,
And I think that's really important, Bruce, even if the language isn't by department boilerplate, it's just really important to have them dovetail and have things
Exactly.
be connected.
and what I would want to do in that case, as in this case rather, is under related policies, maybe there should be a standard statement under police policies that are like this, that officers also need to see the specific town policy regarding employee nepotism or however it's described in the town policy. I think
Can
those cross references are going to be really helpful. And yep,
Can I address one other issue before I forget it?
sure.
The other thing is, I think this policy is not great about dealing with people who get married after they're both employees.
Right.
I mean, and the problem with that is if you have to do any reassignment, somebody can say that they got the worst assignment because of gender.
Right.
So, to the extent that this policy states that assignment or whatever decisions to separate related individuals are made on the basis of seniority or some other objective criteria, or rank, because you got the
Right.
police department has official ranks. That would provide some better guidelines and
More
take some of the
objective.
pressure off the chief to say, well, he's the guy who's got to make the change, or
Right.
she's a
Right.
woman, so, or have somebody think that, which is even
Right.
worse.
Yes. Okay, Dan.
Just a kind of reminder to everybody is the police department is unionized. So as far as protecting employees, the union's going to be really, really on top of that. I'm not saying we don't try to address it in policy, but there's a union contract that controls a lot, way more than I wish, but almost all a lot of these decisions about how seniority affects things and those sorts of decisions. So I think even more that the employees are probably going to be protected through the union. One of the issues that I think Lon brought up that isn't protected by a union is obviously equal opportunity to apply for and get hired for the job because they're not actually members of the union yet. But as far as individual officers and employees, the union does a really good job of protecting those folks from inappropriate management decisions. So just to kind of keep that in mind as we're developing the policy.
Yep. Okay. If you are all set to do this, I think we can do this, and I know that I will take it and Dan will take it. We'll be sharing this with Stu and our HR department, so that in fact those are all good suggestions to try to dovetail the work, particularly in these where they're more much more relatable across the entire employee staff of the town. It might be helpful for us. Linda, I'm going to ask you to go down to the purpose statement and cross out everything. It's perfectly okay to do that. Watch that. Because nothing is permanent. There we go. Yep. We'll keep purpose there for a moment. But, so, it does mention, even though it's crossed off at the moment, what do we want to say regarding the purpose of such a policy? I do like the idea of it's reflecting a number of not always coincident or always cooperative values, that the town and the police department have a set of values and that they're being reflected in policy. So can we at least make a list of the values that we think ought to be reflected in this? And Linda, all I want you to do is listen to me when the time comes, and we will add that list of values. Oops. If we can just get that list together in the next 5 or 10 minutes, then we're going to take a break.
Okay.
A 5-minute break. Okay? What are the values that we're talking about? Besides avoiding conflicts of interest.
Equal employment opportunity.
Okay, so Linda, you're gonna write down, under values, thank you, just colon, and now, yep, make a list. Avoiding conflicts of interest,
Advancement based on merit.
yeah. Advancement based on merit. Providing equal employment, yeah. Providing equal employment opportunities.
Okay.
I don't know if encouraging workplace harmony or
Yep,
good relations.
yep. Some of that
Goes in
stuff
there.
that's, yep. So, yes. Encouraging or promoting, I think you could say, and promoting harmonious, efficient, and productive working relationships. That's
Yeah.
from above.
An environment.
Working environment.
Yeah, harmonious working relationships. Just creating. Yeah, can we talk about creating a positive working environment? Is that too vague? I think we know what we mean. How are those for values?
The only word that was not included that was on the original list is safety. Is that a particular value?
I would hope so. And particularly, how would we want to say that in that? Because it has a particular meaning in this context of. I mean,
Yes.
You know, it's talking about really safety between in that personnel sense.
Is it, or should it be? Perhaps safety should be a little bit broader.
Talk to me, Kara.
So, when you said it's specific in that personnel situation or in that issue, I'm thinking about what if you have officers that are out in the field and there's, some sort of familial relationship over here and your good partner over here.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a split second decision to maintain safety for the person who is, and officer, correct me if I'm wrong, I have no idea what I'm talking about. You have to make a split second decision about who's in danger and whose safety takes a priority. So perhaps making it a little bit broader in that sense. Does that make sense?
Dan, for Ferrara.
So are you talking about like if we go to a call and there's a relationship between one of the responding officers and the person that's a subject on the call?
Yeah, that could be a scenario. Yeah.
So if that's the case, I mean, depending on the actual, if it's a quote unquote hot call like an assault or something like that, and dispatch sends officers there, obviously whoever the initial responding officer, the person that gets there first, is going to assure the safety of everyone there. They're going to assess whether anyone needs medical attention, if the scene is safe at the time, if there's any existing threat by the time that we get there. And then as other officers get there, scene kind of calms down and an investigation will ensue. As far as the criminal investigation side of it, if it were to be a criminal thing in nature, that the officer, if an officer was initially assigned to it, but it is discovered that there might be a conflict of interest due to it, maybe it's a family member or close friend or some other type of relationship, another officer will take over the investigative portion of it. That way, as far as the prosecution would go, there would be no question of the conflict of interest or any one-sided feelings that may take place if the officer that had the relationship continued with the investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Linda, write down safety. Just write it down for the moment. I don't want to lose that, but I'm not sure I know exactly
Yeah.
how I want to do there, what I want to do there, or what we
Okay.
want to do there.
Bruce?
Yes, Kate.
Yeah. I brought up the idea of safety, but now that we're talking about it, it takes on more dimension. And I'm thinking that there's the distinction in my mind between feeling safe within your workplace to do your job and get the respect of your coworkers, and the other safety is keeping each other safe on the job, because so much of the police work is about public safety. So I'm wondering how we could massage a statement that includes both of those things.
Kate, that's exactly where I was, and I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break and come back in 5 minutes and try to answer that question and not worry too much about the language of this set of values and how it works into a purpose statement. I think the purpose of the policy is to try to advance all of these different values, and then see if we can construct maybe a policy A and a policy B. A being nepotism. I think Lon's idea is a good one, and then a policy B on fraternization. Although I hate that term, maybe we can come up with a better term than that. And see if we can actually get good policy statements underneath those two topics. So let's take a 5-minute break. And remember that Catamount is going to be with us. Okay? Thanks everybody for your good work so far. 5 minutes. We'll be back back to can I call us back together? Good. Let me try a suggestion. And since a lot of these have verbs to it, we could say maintaining a safe working environment, one, and maintaining officer safety in the field as a second part of safety. So that safety really is in two contexts. What do you folks think of something like that?
Good.
Good point.
Does that work? So why don't we just say, Linda, write down maintain a safe working environment.
Work environment.
Work environment, thank you. That's much better. And don't worry about that blue line. And what was the verb?
Protecting the safety.
Yeah, protecting the safety of officers in the field. for right now, that's a placekeeper, but, yep. And we can massage that, but that's a placeholder enough to, so that the purpose, the way I would think of this, and we don't even have to work on it right now, is the purpose of the policy is to advance all of these differing and sometimes competing values. Would we agree with that?
Fairness
Yeah.
is the word I'd like you to add.
Oh, fair, yeah.
For a placeholder, there are lots of different ways fairness
Yep.
comes up, but
Right, let's put down fairness for right now and not worry about, because it'll come up when we start talking policy, when the actual policy language comes up. So
In that,
pardon
with
me?
that- I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, with that word, I'd like to think about fair hiring and firing practices. I mean, is that a value within the department?
Sure. So even, can we just say, well, let's see. Linda, go another line down. Doesn't mean all this stuff is going to stay. Fair hiring and firing practices. And yeah, we've already talked about promotion, I think,
We have.
I believe. Okay? We'll come back to this before we leave today at 4. Okay. So that's actually number, Linda, we're gonna go back and you're just gonna not cross off the word, purpose right at the top. Yeah, you're gonna leave that whole, see where it says purpose? That big thing? Yep, we're gonna leave, so don't cross off. I think it's because you crossed off the Roman numeral 1. Just don't delete it. Do you see where I am on line 5? Yep. I don't know how you undelete that when you get a chance. So I'm going to let me suggest that we move to, under policy, we're going to do essentially the same. We may very well use some of this language eventually, but right now let's just delete the whole paragraph. Right. And go to, this is going to be it'll say policy still, and it'll say letter A, nepotism. And then go right, yeah. Don't worry about any of that other stuff. We can fix that later. Dan Monks, this is where I think we will need you, but basically we would say, it is the policy of the Bennington Police Department that no person will be hired who meets the definition of family relationship. Basically, isn't that what our current practice is? I want to tweak that definition because that seems weird to me the way that's written, but I don't even know what relative includes a significant other. That strikes me as weird, but my understanding is our current practice is, it is the policy of the Bennington Police Department. Actually, you can just say the Bennington Police Department, BPD, shall not hire anybody who falls within the definition of family relationship. or something like that. Somebody's got better language than me.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, of course you can.
I think family relationship is too narrow, given what the policy is.
Right.
And so I would create a term with sort of that you capitalize, that would be called related individuals or related person or something like that, because then you can have family members, you can have people
Right.
cohabiting, you can have people who may not be strictly related by blood, but who've been raised in a household as if
Right.
they were related by blood. You can,
Right. And that we can actually, just by changing that definition. So can we just identify it as, and shall not hire, or not consider for hiring, no, not hire any person fitting the definition of related individual.
And this is the town's definition, or the definition that's going
The
to be?
town doesn't have a definition that's written down. We are writing the definition that the town will eventually adopt, or if it changes it, it'll change it in both.
Bruce, there is already, just to be clear, a family relationship definition in the existing policy.
That's the one I'm hoping we tweak.
Yes, I just wanted people to understand that.
Right. But we're gonna change that term
Yeah.
from family relationship to related individuals.
Yeah.
I would suggest capitalizing it
Yes.
to highlight the fact that this is a term of art
Right.
with the unique meaning.
I agree.
So there is a town definition.
Yeah. Well, it's in the BPT policy.
There is a Bennington Police Department current directive about it. That's all there is.
That's what I'm asking. There's not one at the town level, just at the Bennington Police Department level.
Correct.
Correct.
And what that is exactly what you see on the document that I sent you.
Yep.
So,
That takes care of hiring. We've got promotion and firing, I guess, under nepotism too.
if they are not hired, do we have to worry about promotion and firing? I mean, I suppose.
That's true, if they
there
don't
might be-
exist. You're right,
You
if they don't exist, they wouldn't.
You do, because they can be married after the fact.
That's the thing. That's the only place that yeah,
I'm having a struggling with this statement a little bit.
sure.
It talked about equal opportunity employment as a value. I don't feel that this statement supports that.
It doesn't. These are competing values.
But we're in the policy section now.
Right.
And so stating that the policy is that the Bennington Police Department shall not hire any persons fitting the definition of related individual. But what if what if they're in two separate departments? What if there's an administrative person and then there's the officer?
So, what's current practice? Let's say I apply for a dispatch job, and my cousin is a patrol officer, and my and I am that's enough.
What's the current practice?
What would the current practice be?
I know if it was a brother or a sister, it would be non-starter. If it's a cousin and there's no supervisory relationship, I think there'd have to be a pretty compelling reason why we considered that person.
So currently, we are still, I get it. Our current practice is we don't do this. What happens if, however, I'm not related, but I'm in one of the administrative positions. I got to get my chart here. I'm in an administrative position, and over the course of, let's say I'll just use this. I'm in the communications center. Is that dispatch, Dan? Is that what we mean by that?
Yes. Yep. They're communicating.
Okay. And as a result of my being on the job, I have a relationship with I get into a relationship with a corporal, and because we both and we end up deciding that we're going to get married. Does that mean I'm fired? Or does it mean the corporal and I have to notify the chief? I mean, I think now you have to notify the chief ASAP.
You should have notified the chief when you first started dating.
That's what I mean. ASAP. You notify the chief ASAP in the relationship. I mean, are we talking about people? We aren't talking about people being fired then.
I'm sorry, how does that relate to the hiring of any persons fitting the definition of a related individual?
It's
And
not. I mean,
go on with that.
go ahead, Kara.
Well, this is really bold, but I think that statement should not be a part of the policy.
Which statement should not be a part of the policy?
The statement that the Bennington Police Department shall not hire any persons fitting the definition of related individual. I think you need to bag that statement. I think that it doesn't support equal opportunity employment, and I think that you're minimizing your hiring pool.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
I think what we can do is make a note that one or more members of the committee don't support that particular policy, but it is current practice. The second
Yes.
suggestion I have is I would do the definitions before I start doing these policy sections. And the third suggestion I have is that you differentiate between closely related individuals and related individuals. Because I think as a matter of practice, Dan has indicated they use some discretion if people aren't closely related, but they still may have some relationship or whatever, and so they exercise discretion. And I think that's not hard to do, but it also reflects that in some of these decisions, some judgment has to be used.
Yep. I think that's probably even the current. And Kara, I might be in agreement with you that I don't like that policy, but that doesn't mean that it's not in essence the current policy. And it's the current policy, as far as I know, across the town, and has been the policy. And you're right. Does it limit employment opportunity? Yep. It just does. I want to come back to that discussion, Kara, and I don't want to lose it, so don't let me lose it.
Okay.
But I do. Can we do at least a couple of things before we? What do you think about going to? I think there ought to be some work on definitions, and then maybe perhaps policy statements will come easier. And if I'm just before Linda, before you start moving too far, in fact, don't go any further than right there. what what does the rest of the committee think about this? I'd be curious.
I agree
About
with
going to the definitions or about the?
Yeah, about going to the definitions first, and we can come back to that first statement regarding nepotism. But I think we ought to know what we're talking about.
that's the foundation. I think it's part of the foundation of the policy. So if you don't have a definition, you're not, what are you talking about then?
Right. Yeah, I think this one in particular, it really does help us. Kate, are you okay with that?
Yes, I am. And, you know, I'm looking at the language that exists here already in the policy, and it's much broader than that statement that's there. It really talks about much more flexibility with
Well,
hiring.
I know that seems to be this desire to throw this policy out, but I frankly don't think this policy is as bad as everybody's saying, and it covers almost everything we've been talking about. Maybe not as succinctly or as in much detail as we'd like it to, but I'm having trouble just throwing out a very thoughtful policy that I think is not as bad as what maybe folks or the rest of the committee is saying. So maybe in the distinct minority on that, but I don't think it's a bad place to start. But
which I'm not actually saying that we're throwing anything out yet, Dan.
Oh, I know, not yet, but we've crossed out 2 whole paragraphs completely.
Yes, we have, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to come in different places. I just think it's so disorganized that we need to create organization here where we can. That's organization creates clarity in my mind.
And my understanding of what he's done is simply said that the language needs to be rewritten, but those sections and those themes are going to continue.
Yep.
And
And
so
we
I
may
don't
actually
think
use
I don't think they're literally deleted.
No, they're
And
not.
we're starting from scratch. That's not
No.
my understanding of what we're doing.
You're exactly correct. We are not starting from scratch. A bunch of stuff that was up above the word nepotism is going to appear in the policy almost verbatim in the long run, I think. Can we sort of move through? It'll help me, I think, if we were to, for example, move through the definitions that currently exist here, and for example, and change the term from family relationship, which I think is one of the things that was bothering him about this, to just change that to related individuals, capital R, capital I.
No, yeah.
Yeah,
It always is plural.
yeah, I think it's going to be plural. So you don't need the parentheses in this case. It's one of those weird times. Just everybody take a look at it.
If you have foster, step, and in-law, you should include adopted.
Yeah, I agree. So that's why this list was not as helpful for me. Yep, foster, step, in-law.
I see you have another one over on children. Okay.
Yep, there's another one, but it should be,
Adopted.
well, under children, including adopted, adoptive.
Adopted.
I would ED, right?
How do you have a foster? Oh,
No, you don't. Parent or adopt. Well, it could be. You could be. There's a parent on the force, and you're their adopted daughter.
Perhaps you want to start with immediate family members or immediate relations and then move on to extended.
So you would say, let's just make sure we have, can we, before we start adjusting that, can we make sure that we have everybody in this list that needs to be there? I actually want us to make sure that we,
Civil union would fit into the last sentence of the paragraph.
Yeah. In looking at this, what I might say is break this up into 2 sentences.
yeah, I'm thinking so too. Go ahead.
And it's a relationship resulting from well, family interest you find, or marriage,
Right.
including a spouse, a parent, child, brother, or sister, period. And including a relationship close relationship between grandparent, grandchild, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, or other relative living in the same household
As the employee.
as the employee or another individual related to them. I mean, I think what Dan is describing is, the immediate family, the nuclear family, no way. There's not a lot of judgment there.
Right.
That they're siblings is enough. And then there's this other group who may be related by blood or marriage, but it's more attenuated. They're further out the tree. And in that case, there's some judgment involved. Now, if he came back and said grandparents are definitely out and grandchildren are definitely out, I would put him in the first group. But depending on what the practice is, I might take aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, and throw them into this latter group where you have to have an additional factor, which is a close relationship between the two that goes beyond just the consanguinity, as the lawyers would say.
But where the manager would still want to know that this relationship exists.
Exactly right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why I was thinking it might be more helpful to create a category called closely related individuals, where the decision making is more black and white, and related individuals where it's not as crystal clear. For example, people may go out for a beer with the dispatcher may go out for a beer with the patrolman and not consider it a date. Would you go to the chief and say we're going out for a beer? But the second or third date, they might get an inkling that there's a relationship going on. They let the chief know.
Right.
But that's not going to necessarily trigger any response by the chief.
No, it's a duty to inform.
Right, but at that point, they may not be what we'll call related individuals because it hasn't crossed that threshold. So I just think it might be helpful to have personal relationship is such a generic term that we're going to be using it generically. And so if we had a distinction between closely related people where there's a very bright line policy and related individuals where there's some discretion involved, it may make the differentiations a little clearer. Now, I'm not married to those words.
No, but right now, in an effort to move us along, Linda, before the word related, can you put in the word closely? Right there. Right.
Well, I just want to understand a little bit better where you're coming from. When you say closely, are you meaning like blood relatives?
More than that, I'm talking about like the nuclear family, the parent-child,
Yep.
the spouses, the partners, the civil union partners, the siblings.
Right.
Maybe the grandparents, if Dan, and grandchildren, if Dan says they would be treated the same way, I would put them in this group.
Right.
But then the second group is more attenuated, the aunt, the uncle, the niece, nephew. They don't get treated like the nuclear family unless there's that bond where, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they have some ongoing relationship where their objectivity may be clouded or impaired.
Okay.
So under this particular statement, there would be instead of the current B, there would be a B that would say related individuals, and that would be everybody from, perhaps at the moment, grandparent, grandparent on up to others individual related by blood or marriage in the same household as a Bennington Police Department employee. Although I don't like in the same household, just so it would include, B would be grandparents, grandchild, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, or other living relatives living in the community.
I think you can play with, I don't think we need to comment on that last part. I think we can
Right. We
set
can
on
just,
our own.
but so if we can go to Linda for, yes, right. And then just take all of the ones from grandparent on up to, yeah, those would be just related individuals and they would be grandparent. The only thing that I would want to make sure is that we say that included in the closely related individuals are, I'm still not sure I know about significant others, but certainly domestic partners and civil union partners. I don't know what significant others isn't.
The phrase that's often used in the LBG community is people in a sharing a committed relationship,
Yeah,
as opposed to significant other.
yeah.
Or other.
So it crosses all of the spectrums of people who don't believe in marriage or civil
Right.
union to
Exactly.
alternative, but they're in a committed relationship.
Yep, so up above, Linda, on line 39, we would say closely related includes, individuals includes, and we'll clean this up. No, I need to spend time doing it. Domestic partner, civil union partner. Get rid of domestic, get rid of significant other for the moment. Domestic partner, civil union partner. I think that's actually going to be capitalized, but don't worry about it for right now. Yep. And persons living in a committed relationship. Period. for right now, that includes the people I think are essentially, that's where the bright line is. Don't worry about this would include under line 3. We aren't going to worry about that for the moment.
And the related individuals may expand as you think about it.
Say that again?
That who's encompassed by related individuals may expand a little bit as you think about it. I mean, again, I think you could include the people in a personal relationship in related individuals. People who are dating or engaged in a romantic relationship with cohabiting.
Yeah. So Linda, the easiest way to deal with that is just delete the word. Nope. You don't even you don't need to go. This would include. Just delete all that, and just delete the term personal relationship. Cross that all off along with letter C, and then stop at nope. Stop at the colon. Stop at the colon. There we go. We're going to delete the colon too, but that's all right. So, in other words, that whole sentence belongs to related individuals. Mm-hmm. Now, it does. It's automatically there. Supervisor is okay for everybody?
No.
Yes.
I think so. Subordinate is okay?
I would just add seniority.
Rank, job classification, or rank? Oh, I see what you mean. So put comma after rank.
Seniority or job
seniority, comma. Put another comma after seniority, please. That's good.
Okay.
And do the same thing below. Perfect. Linda deserves to get double time pay for this. Do we need a definition of dating?
I'm too old. It's too complicated now.
I have go ahead. I'm happy to take any suggestions on this one.
I don't think it's necessary.
I don't either. I mean, that was my first thought was, why?
Understated.
Yeah, I think that just creates more trouble than it's worth.
Mm-hmm. You just get rid of
Well,
it.
if people are supposed to be reporting such a thing,
Well, yes, I
they
think
may
if
want to
we-
know.
Well, yes, and I think how we say what they have a duty to report, I think will be critical. Right.
Well, let me ask a question then.
Yep.
If they're platonic friends, is there a duty to report? Dan?
Wait, me, Dan, or Dan Monks?
Either one, I guess.
Dan, Ferrara, you're the one that deals with this.
Okay, so what do you specify, or what's this?
Platonic friends. Female, let's just make this easy. Female officer, male officer, oftentimes go after they're in the same shift. After the shift, they go to someplace and they get, let's say they're on the night shift. They go to someplace and share a cup of coffee afterwards. No romance, none of that, just a platonic relationship. Do they have to report that?
No.
That's what I thought.
If once they have intimate relations and somebody wants to talk about sex, is that a bright line? Yes, that's when they have to tell the chief.
Yep, because that would be considered the romantic relationship, even if it doesn't last. Just the fact that it happened would still have to be reported.
And I think we should have the word dating, not necessarily dating, but we should talk about intimate or sexual relations, or because I think they were,
Thing.
I think they were hinting at that, but I think we should be a little bit more sterile and just call it what it is.
Well, I think it's more than if they are having sex. I think if they're having a romantic relationship, even without sex, they are required to report it. And that's the term that's under duty to notify in the procedures.
Right,
I
but
think we need to have it,
what makes a relationship romantic?
their self-perception. I don't think you can have a bright line on this one.
I know, but I just think the word romantic,
Bruce, I have a
how does
question.
it go from two people having different aspirations for a relationship?
Oh, I know. But they're both employees, then they would end up, somebody would have to report it. Whoever has the aspiration. Carrie, you were about to say something.
In the earlier part of this discussion, I heard two different situations. The actual relationship that has been established, and then the potential for. Does the potential for the relationship need to be reported?
Dan, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sense of what do you mean by the potential for a relationship?
So what if there's a
What's your
discussion?
scenario that you're thinking?
So if there's a discussion between two employees at the police department, and they're discussing whether it's the right fit, and they're taking into consideration work, is that something that needs to be reported to the chief?
So are you saying that like two employees have been hanging out outside of work and they're figuring out if it's going to turn into something, or?
Yes.
So yeah, that would be covered under the current
General order.
definition where it says circumstances that would lead to a romantic relationship. So if they're starting to hang out and they're starting to have that talk of, are we just hanging out as friends, or is this going to go somewhere, then that would fall under that definition.
Okay. So then I think that we need to perhaps not get rid of that definition, but break it out.
I don't know what you mean by break it out.
So intended to lead into a romantic relationship is not officially dating.
No, but one or more social meetings between employees is.
Problematic because it can be platonic. I
know, I don't like it. That's why but I don't know how to get rid of it.
So dispatcher has a crush on patrol person. She have to report it to police. Dispatcher's hopeful, not reciprocated, too fearful to find out if it will be reciprocated. I mean,
I would say no, because there's at least under the current, when I look at the duty to notify, which is in the procedures granted, although I think this is in fact a policy statement, in the event that a Bennington Police Department employee becomes involved in a romantic relationship, that's the starting point where there's a duty to notify. If you are in a romantic relationship, not if I'm in I'm anticipating that I would like to be in a romantic relationship with another employee, that's not a duty to notify anybody.
but dating by definition, is intended to lead.
Is it?
That's what it says right here in black and white.
In this definition, yes.
One or more social meetings between employees under circumstances reasonably intended to lead to a romantic. That's not the same thing as meetings, social gathering, social meeting together, and it's automatically a romantic relationship. That's not what that says.
No, but one person's intention may not be reciprocated.
True.
I
So I would say it's incumbent upon the person who has let's say, just for hypothetical sake, I'm the dispatcher. And I, several times seek to share coffee or share a beer with one of the patrol officers on whom I have a crush. And I want that to lead to a romantic relationship. And I do that several times. It seems to me then under this current policy, whether I share that with the other officer or not doesn't really matter. I have a duty to notify I have a duty to notify the chief of police as soon as possible.
Oh, I disagree.
That's what I think. That's what I think. Lines 18, 19, and 20 say of page 3. Granted, it's in the procedures, not in the policy, but it's in the procedures. That's what the procedures say. I would like it to be actually in the policy section. I think that's a policy, not just a procedure.
Well, here's what the problem is that the lines you just pointed out don't talk about people who are dating. It talks about people who are in a romantic relationship already.
Yeah.
Right, and what is that? When does that get triggered? I agree that there's a disjoint between the procedures and the policy. I get that in the definitions. That's one of the problems of this particular draft.
So, I think the difference isn't dating. I think it's whether or not they're in an intimate relationship, which indicates they cross the threshold from aspirations to actually.
So you think the line should be an intimate relationship?
And I think you should define what that is in here to give it, put a little meat on the bones, because as I'm starting to learn, and as you pointed out, sex isn't the only thing that creates an intimate relationship.
Exactly.
A consensual relationship between
Or
Okay.
or a serious relationship that doesn't necessarily have to include intimacy in a physical sense, but could be something more. But I think that where I disagreed with you before, Bruce, was it's got to be mutual. It can't be somebody's idea that this is going somewhere, but maybe it's not.
Oh, I'm not saying. The point is, when do I, as the employee, have to report it to the chief? And I don't think we have to wait for it to be mutual, because
Really?
because the conflict of interest can automatically kick in if I want my partner to get a particular position, and I'm in a position to influence that.
Wait,
That's the problem. And the other person doesn't necessarily need to know any of that, but the damage is done by my conflict of interest. So
I agree with that.
yeah,
But I think the intimacy I was thinking about can be sexual,
Yep.
but intimacy can also be in the fact that you share
Sure.
information about yourself, self-perception, all that other stuff.
Yep.
That you don't share with the rest of the world, or don't feel comfortable sharing with the rest of the world.
Exactly.
So, but I don't think platonic dating should trigger it, or a person's aspiration for more of a relationship. I think sexual intimacy, whether it's friends with benefits or whatever, that should be reported.
Yes, I agree.
And if there's other types of intimacies, like Kate talked about, I use the word intimate for those, but and there are other terms like Kate pointed out. But I do think we ought to.
So it's not really about dating.
No, or not necessarily romance either.
Right, I think romantic relationships needs to come out. And I
Okay.
think along what Lon is saying is consensual relations.
I like the term intimacy because it covers so much
Intimate.
ground.
Yes, it does.
So so I'm still going to suggest that that the term dating isn't really what we want to be defining here. What we want to be defining is the relationship that triggers a duty to notify, basically, and that is, I would call it an intimate relationship. And Kate, I don't expect that most of the time it's only a one-way kind of thing. I would consider the normative situation to be that this is fully consensual, but I don't want to let the other one off the hook if it's not, because that can throw a monkey wrench into everything.
Okay.
I'm worried about because I've seen that happen in particular institutions. So Linda, try this. Delete, that whole section that you've got highlighted, delete it, and make a different E, a new E. Oh, that's right. Don't worry about that. How about defining intimate relationship, for the lack of a better term right now?
I have a quick question for the officer.
Sure.
If there's like a one-way crush, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, there's a one-way crush, and that gets reported to the chief. What does the chief do with that information?
So just a one-way crush, to me, I don't think that has any type of ground in this. Just because someone has feelings for another, if there's no actual action taking place, and as long as it doesn't create an atmosphere where, let's say, one would supervise the other, especially if the one that has the crush. So if the person that doesn't have the crush or has no feelings for the other person at all shouldn't be affected in this. But if the person that
Be true.
feelings is for some, possibly might have a supervisory role, and maybe that happened, but I mean, just because the person has the crush, that means A, they'd have to tell the other person that, hey, I have a crush on you, and B, then the chief would have to be notified. I mean, to cover the bases, maybe they should, just in case it might cause conflict later on.
But it's not the practice right now.
Well, yeah, as far as a single, like a one-sided crush, like you said, I don't know that that's any sort of practice, because like I said, the other person might not have any idea that they have any involvement in a crash.
Right. So that conflicts, Bruce, with what you were saying earlier.
No, Kara, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, because I'm thinking of a specific situation in a department, a police department, where in fact a dispatcher had a friendly relationship with a patrol officer. And that friendly relationship actually was a one-way crush, but the patrol officer never knew it. And the dispatcher actually, they would go and share coffee together. For that dispatcher, that was a date, even though the patrol officer never considered it that way. What ends up happening is that, there can be situations that are one way, but there is still, quote unquote, as Dan just called it, action. Something, somebody takes something one way. This can become very destructive in an organization. I'm not saying it's the usual, but I want to make sure that it's in other words, the duty to notify the chief has to be on an individual, not on just the fact that there's all of a sudden a couple. The couple would also have a duty, but an individual officer or employee should also have that same duty. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I was trying to understand better where you were coming from with that.
Well, because not all relationships are reciprocal in actual human life, and I've seen it happen in several different places. One police department in particular. So I think all I want to make sure is that the duty to report or the duty to notify is a duty upon the individual. There doesn't have to actually be a couple yet.
Mm-hmm.
So an intimate relationship is and you guys have this, is a relationship where individuals share more deeply than they would with the general population. And or, have sex.
Or have intimate relations.
Oh, well, I know.
I think it needs work. I'm not sure we're gonna get there
Yeah,
this afternoon. The
I
other
agree.
thing that we've been pushing for this, duty of the individual to report, but I just want to reflect the flip side of the argument, so we keep this in perspective.
Yeah.
Which is that the thought of going to, say, the chief of police in an environment that, if you're a police officer, there's a certain amount of physical self-confidence. You might have been in sports. There might even be somewhat of a locker room attitude about some things. I'm not saying this police department, but I'm just saying the kind of individuals that sometimes are attracted to this type of work aren't always the most sensitive individuals about other people's feelings. And so requiring somebody to report something this personal, can be used as a weapon to humble or humiliate someone who doesn't deserve it, or put them in a situation where it's not a shared value with everybody else and make them an outsider to the rest of the group. So I would just want to make sure that if they're going to have a duty to report, something this personal, that they have to report it when it's going to affect their ability to be objective and do their job, as if they didn't have these relationships.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be treated with the kind of respect it deserves, because it really can set up people for ridicule and humiliation in a workplace. You know, office gossip can be a terrible thing.
Yeah.
True. Yep, I agree. I'm aware of the time, and I'm wanting to go back if we can. Let me just ask a question ahead of time, and you can just answer yes or no, I think, to these. Do we need a definition of nepotism, and do we need a definition of fraternization?
Well, yeah.
Reference for this
And
policy.
yes, let me just say that on the IACP materials that I sent you, there was a definition of nepotism, and there was the definition of fraternization.
Yeah, as long as it's closely integrated with these definitions you're coming up with.
Right. I think we would want to under nepotism, it would be employment of a relative or an immediate family member, as defined in, and then our definition. And fraternization would be, they have the definition of may include many types of interpersonal relationships. The focus of the basically romantic or sexual relationships. And we would use intimate relationship. If we can include those as that's defined in that paper. And that would be fine with me. I heard Lon say yes. Kara, is that okay? John, is that okay?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary, but it's fine, it doesn't hurt.
Right. Kate?
Sure. I'm really not sure how you would ever enforce a policy like that, a requirement for people to report. And, I would certainly worry about repercussions.
Well, I understand that. I'm going to say, I think the procedures would want to have very careful what happens when a individual reports. And what are the duties of the chief in that setting? And I think always that's a, because it is a critical part of dealing with interpersonal relationships. But I can imagine the chief calling the other party in and saying, "Are you having an intimate relationship with X?" And if the person says no, well, I've had a report, and the report is from her or from him. And at this point, you need to work through, there needs to be a process by which that information gets dealt with. And at that point, then the chief has a personnel issue to deal with, like any other personnel issue, because that will happen. But it's better for the chief, the idea of reporting is that it's better for the chief to know this than to not know that a potential conflict of interest is sitting there in the midst of her or his department.
Okay.
I mean, that to me is the overarching value of, as we described it earlier in the document. If we can, for the last 20 minutes or so, if we can go back and take a look at back to policy, and if we can look at particularly, are there statements within the stuff that we crossed out without talking about, just if we can identify those, we can undelete them and move them to places where they belong. And it seems to me there's really two sections. There's a hiring, i.e. nepotism section, and there's a, for lack of a better word, and I don't like it, but it's there, fraternization, or what happens when there are intimate relations or intimate relationships within the department. So, are there places in this particular statement where you think the that belong in a policy statement or ideas? Go ahead, Kara.
Starting at line 15 with the word however. Almost all the way down.
Yep. So it says, and we could get rid of the word however. It is the policy of the Bennington Police Department, hang on, Melinda, to ensure that its employees carry out their duties with impartiality and fairness so that the public and organizational confidence in the actions of the employees is maintained, public trust, da 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 da. So that, where would you think that would go? Under the, in general? Is that a generalized statement that would meet both? So it might be under policy, and then there's an A and a B piece.
Yes, it feels to me like a very general statement.
I agree. And that would go all the way.
Can she scroll down a little bit?
Yep, scroll down a little bit more, Linda.
Oh, that's the end of it. Yeah, so from 15 down.
So, Linda, right from where your cursor is right now, all the way, nope. Yeah, okay, you could do that, but what I want you to do is undelete from that point all the way to the word perceived conflict. Can we undelete it? I hope we can. Go up to review and just say, go to there and where it says
Reject.
reject. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you, Linda.
I would add the word complaint.
Where?
You're not trying to avoid complaints. You're trying to avoid.
No. You're right. Where is that word?
Okay.
So I think in the second sentence, yeah, there it is.
So just favoritism? Just
Yeah, that's what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
okay.
And I would get rid of and or and just have and.
Yeah, we don't need the dash and or.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Would it make sense to take this piece of the policy statement, and I'm wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to put it up into the purpose area as a value statement rather than as part of the policy? But in my opinion, it seems like it has more to do with the intent of where this is going rather than actual carrying it out. What do you think?
I would like to think about it.
Okay.
What do other people think? I
Starts
get
out
your
with-
point. John?
Starts out with, it is the policy, so
Yeah.
we could leave it there too.
I understand where she's coming from.
I do too.
I think it's worth considering.
It is. I mean, and the easiest way to put that there is we would say something like, Bennington Police, rather than saying it is the policy of, we would say the Bennington Police Department
It is the intention.
or intends or ensures that will ensure that its employees carry out their duties with impartiality. I mean, that's in essence, or yes, it is the intention.
And then Bruce,
Yeah.
I think if this were part of a value statement up in the purpose section, you could
Yeah.
still include all these points
Right,
for clarity under the policy.
as bullet points.
Yes, well, yes, clarifying.
Or clarifying statements. I would probably come back to you with, I mean, that would be what we would do between now and next Monday when it comes back to you. Let's try that and see what it looks like. Linda, can you do this? Can you take,
Well, section 1 was called the purpose section, and that's the purpose. That's the section we're talking about, right?
yeah, except all that was that was all in the policy section. So
Okay.
yeah, what we really want to do, Linda, is if you could see where it starts with where it's black, and say, or actually, start with the word the, and copy all that, or cut it and paste it into the purpose section right after, right there. Yep, the Bennington Police Department intends to, for the moment. Why not? Yeah. What do we think of that? I think that is much more helpful. We'll get to, we'll figure out a way to incorporate the values list because I think they're important. And we may, you'll probably see a big difference there. Can we move to just what would be, okay, so all of that black stuff now is deleted. And under nepotism, A, right? Instead of, I mean, we can, instead of doing it quite that boldly, we could easily say that employment of a person falling within the definition of closely related individual, whatever that terminology was, shall not, closely related individuals shall not, let's see, why don't we just hold on to that language as it is? And it, by the way, I think now we know that definition is closely related individuals. Granting that we don't all agree with that, but that's been a town policy for as long as I can remember, actually. Do we want to say something about persons who will fall outside of that but are still have a relationship?
Yeah, I think the manager, town police chief should know.
Yes.
People should explain in the application that they have close connections or not so close, relationships with certain
Yep.
officers.
So, we could say something like, John, persons applying for positions within the department. Linda, you're writing this down, hopefully. Persons apply for positions within the department, within the BPD.
Shall disclose.
Shall disclose any relationships with current employees that fall within the definitions of this policy, and that'll be incumbent upon the chief to, in the procedures, to make sure that the employment, the sheet that they fill out, the employment application, includes that kind of information.
Right.
The only thing with that, Bruce, is people that are
Yeah.
applying for the job aren't bound to abide by our policies and procedures. So I think it should say, kind of flip that and say the chief needs to obtain from any applicants any relationships that,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Now, I know what you mean. I think that's better. So the chief of police, just start right there. The chief of police shall obtain from persons applying for positions within the BPD,
Disclosure.
and disclosure. Yep, just get rid of shall. Disclosure of
That falls.
that. Yeah, that's I think correct. Does that meet what you were thinking of, Dan? At the moment?
Yeah. Yep. I just wanted to, because like I said, there wouldn't be anything to hold on to if you're, because
Right.
that
Yep.
apply for the position don't have to abide by policies.
Yep. Can we, for the moment, since this seemed to me, let's do a B called fraternization. Yep. And the policy statement would be under this one, I really think this is where the duty to disclose comes to.
Maybe an intimate relationship must be reported, and then actions taken to prevent that relationship from leading to conflicts of interest. This can include reassignments or even termination, something like that.
Right. Something like, well, certainly reassignment. I mean, the notion of supervision, I think you need to, you're right. I mean, I don't think we need to be specific in our part of this, but the need for avoiding conflicts of interest, basically, as a result. So can we just make the statement that how about language here is so hard. In the event that BPD employees become involved in an intimate relationship comma, they shall notify the chief, or he or she should be, and actually it probably should be, in the event that a BPD employee becomes involved in an intimate relationship, it should be an, to make sure it's, okay, that's right, a employee becomes involved in an intimate relationship with another employee, he or she, yep.
I would try to avoid pronouns for right now.
Okay.
Okay.
The
The
employee has a duty to notify the chief of police. Thank you. As soon as possible.
And I would change the word from the to each. Because we're not talking about a single employee.
Right. So,
Each employee has a duty to notify.
okay, yeah. You know what, Linda, go back to get rid of the before that and say each. There you go.
So it doesn't, the numbers don't matter. There have to be at least two. And
Yeah.
everyone involved in that intimate relationship has a duty to report.
Yes. Yes. And then new sentence. I actually think that the chief of police, and I'm sure he'll have some words on this, shall be responsible to assure that no employee involved in such a relationship shall have a supervisory role with any other employee.
That language just suggests anybody involved in a romantic relationship can't supervise any other individual. So
Within that relationship.
So he's assured that that a supervisor will not supervise an employee with whom that supervisor is having a romantic relationship. Does that get at it?
But not with any other.
It could be simplified as supervisor shall not supervise an employee with which the supervisor is having a romantic relationship.
Yeah, or intimate relationship.
Intimate relationship.
Okay, so we don't
I
have
wouldn't just lay it on the chief because
yeah, yeah. Yeah, delete everything back to the chief of police, Linda.
so we would
say
supervisor shall not supervise an employee with whom the supervisor is having an intimate relationship.
Yeah. Supervise an employee with whom?
The supervisor is having an intimate relationship.
Do you want to use subordinate since that's defined below as well, instead of supervisor?
Or right,
Yeah, with whom? Yeah,
with
a subordinate.
a subordinate, sure. Good.
Thank you.
Bruce,
With an employee who is hang on a second, with an employee who is a subordinate.
Subordinates are employees.
Right. So you're not.
It's just
I'm
with
not.
a subordinate.
Yes.
It's nice. They have to be an employee to be a subordinate.
Okay. Right. So Linda can only listen to one person at a time, and that person is me. So let's delete right where you are. Nope. We can start with after supervise, after the word supervise. Right there. Yep, delete that. With
No, not with.
nope. But supervisor shall not supervise
A
a
subordinate.
subordinate with whom a subordinate.
Period.
Period.
No, it's got to be. Of course, they can supervise a subordinate. They can't supervise a subordinate with whom they have an intimate relationship.
Bruce,
Isn't that what we were trying to say, Kara?
I have a
Okay.
4 o'clock. And-
I hear you, and it is 4.
Yes.
And
Thank you
I'm
very much.
I'm happy to adjourn us and to give this. We may not be done, but we may be able to do much of this next week within our own time frame. And I'll let you all do that within your time frame to the degree that you're able to and willing. Thank you for your work. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the questions. We're going to save where we are. Linda, you're going to send this on to Dan. Dan, you're going to thank you for being with us today. Thank you all for being with us today. And you'll be hearing from me probably early next week. This may take a little bit longer. And you'll all have 5 days. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you for your good work, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.